The male protagonist was completely dazzled by the robot's beautiful appearance when he bought it. He couldn't get enough of looking at it from the front and would sneak peeks at its back. Immediately after, the manager called him over and handed him an instruction manual. His wink was quite suggestive. When he got home, his son Toby had a rather complicated expression when he saw the robot. But the problems quickly arose. When the wife came home from work, the kids all became silent. As expected, Laura pulled Joe aside, and the couple had a big argument. It turns out that the wife had always opposed bringing a robot into the household, while the husband took the opportunity to go ahead and get one while she was away on a business trip. Joe said, "You're always busy with work, and I'm the one handling all the housework. The papers even say that men who do the dishes get Alzheimer's. I don't want that. Besides, this thing has a 30-day free trial. If it doesn't work out, we can return it." Reluctantly, Laura agreed, but when the robot introduced itself to Laura,
"My name is Anita Hawkins."
Laura froze when she heard the robot's name, followed by her husband's last name. It was either a child's name or a wife's, but Anita clearly didn't resemble either. Anita was quick and efficient. She woke up before dawn, prepared a huge breakfast for everyone, and never repeated a dish. Joe told a bad joke, and Anita laughed along. However, she didn't know when to stop. At the same time, Anita had a particular affection for the youngest daughter, and the daughter seemed to like Anita as well. Not only that, but Laura also noticed that, late at night, Anita was standing at the door, staring at the youngest daughter. Laura wasn't sure if it was just a feeling, but it seemed like Anita was upset. This made Laura uneasy. She ordered Anita not to touch Sophie again, but that evening, Anita suddenly picked up a sleeping Sophie and walked out the door, disappearing into the night. The next morning, Laura woke up with a sense of foreboding. She immediately went to her daughter's room. Sophie was asleep in her bed, but her pajamas had been changed and were soaked through. Laura sniffed them carefully and then asked her daughter if she had wet the bed and why her clothes were changed. Sophie said she hadn't changed, and Laura, still puzzled, noticed the rain-soaked window and finally realized it had rained the night before. In the dining room, she saw Anita's shoes drying on the windowsill, and a strange suspicion arose in her mind, which she quickly dismissed. After all, Anita was just a routine robot. How could that be? Still, Laura took the opportunity, when no one was around, to ask Anita if she had taken Sophie outside that night. Anita said no, but Laura continued to suspect, and Anita replied, "My programming prevents me from lying." But Laura wasn't convinced. She was certain something was wrong with the robot. The problem was, how could she convince her family? Anita's attentive care had won everyone's affection, and Laura felt more like a transparent person in the house. Anita was becoming a part of the family, especially Sophie, who ignored everything Laura said and refused to take a bath until Anita finished telling her a story. But with a single word from Anita, Sophie obediently went to take a bath. This made Laura feel uneasy. One day, when Anita took food out of the oven, Sophie suddenly rushed over. Anita quickly moved away, but the hot baking pan burned Laura's arm. Anita said, "I made the best choice to protect Sophie." Laura didn't say anything, but she wasn't entirely alone. Her eldest daughter, Maddie, wasn't fond of robots either, so she often observed Anita. One day, a robot from a neighboring house passed by. When it saw Anita, it stopped and asked, "Why don't you share your data?" It turned out that robots were supposed to connect and share information. This Anita definitely had a problem. Maddie told her mother, and when Laura heard this, all her doubts suddenly became concrete evidence. She called for Anita, ready to confront her, but Anita seemed not to understand what Laura was saying. Laura thought she was pretending, so she asked again if Anita had taken Sophie out that night. Anita replied, "I will protect Sophie." A robot should have no emotions, but to say something like that meant something was definitely wrong with Anita. Laura was sure of it and immediately called the manufacturer to demand a return. At that moment, Sophie upstairs started screaming. Anita rushed upstairs to find Sophie had had a nightmare. Sophie clung to Anita and begged her to hug her. Anita said, "I cannot hug you without your parents' permission," but Sophie didn't care and kept pleading. Eventually, Anita did hug Sophie. When Laura arrived and saw this, she was shocked. Fearing Anita might harm Sophie, she ordered Anita to let go. Soon after, Joe and the kids returned home, and upon seeing Sophie crying, they asked what happened. They learned that Laura had tried to return Anita. Toby, in a frenzy, rode his bike and tried to take a shortcut to get ahead of his mother. At that moment, Anita, sitting in the car, saw Toby and then looked at the rearview mirror. It seemed as if something clicked in her mind. Suddenly, she rushed onto the road and stopped a speeding car. In the end, Toby was saved, but Anita became somewhat distorted and deformed. From then on, Anita and the family had a bond that could not be broken. They became much closer. The man was tending to his maid's wounds, and blue liquid was flowing from the wound. The maid was a robot, yet Joe still felt uneasy, knowing she was artificial. Toby, standing by the door, eavesdropped on everything, growing more anxious. He couldn't help but show disrespect towards Anita once, but thankfully she stopped him. Anita didn't tell his parents, nor did she scold him. Instead, she encouraged him to be a person of integrity. At that moment, Toby feared his father wasn't as upright as he should be. More importantly, Anita had been injured to save him. Because of this incident, the three siblings completely sided with Anita and began to distance themselves from their mother. Joe called Laura and Anita into the room, and the scene felt like a confrontation between a wife and a mistress. However, in response to Laura's accusations, Anita refuted her with a single sentence: "Robots cannot lie to humans." Laura felt a deep discomfort, as though she had seen a ghost, but no one believed her. After all, she had seen Anita out on the balcony at night, gazing at the moon and secretly watching Sophie as she slept, even saying she would protect Sophie forever. This wasn't a robot, it was more like a real person. In fact, Anita resembled a female spy more than a robot. She often observed Laura secretly, snooping around the house when Laura wasn't there and finding Laura's long-hidden diary. In it, there was a line, "Laura and Tom." When Sophie came looking for her, Anita quietly put the diary back. However, the next event truly unsettled everyone. One night, Sophie refused to let her mother put her to bed and insisted on Anita doing it. Anita entered the room and, with just a few words, convinced Sophie. She then went downstairs and told Laura. Sophie changed her mind. "She wants you to go up." Laura went upstairs and finished reading Sophie her bedtime story. Just as she was about to leave, Sophie called her and asked, "Are you happy?" Laura replied that she was happy. Sophie then said, "Anita told me that if I let you tell me a story, you'd be happy." Matty, who overheard this, was stunned, and Laura went straight to Anita. To everyone's surprise, Laura sincerely thanked the robot. The next day, Laura felt like Anita was a ticking time bomb. She searched online for information and found out that some robots had been recalled after their programs were tampered with. Perhaps Anita had been illegally modified. To test this, Laura took a toothpick and pricked Anita's palm to check for pain sensation, as activating pain sensors would be the first step of illegal modification. To her shock, Anita cooperated and picked up a toothpick, inserting it into her own eye. Laura was horrified, realizing Anita didn't feel pain. How could she explain this? Suddenly, Anita asked, "Who is Tom?" Laura angrily scolded Anita and forbade her from mentioning that name again. Tom's name was heard by Joe, who suddenly felt like everything was falling apart. Maddie plugged a data cable into Anita because she was so disturbed by how understanding Anita had been that day. But then Anita suddenly grabbed Maddie and screamed for help. The man had a battery in his brain. Whenever it ran out of power, he'd feel dizzy, but once recharged, he became full of energy. His father had given him 4 robots, and he had been living a life of hiding. Although robots were everywhere in this era, these 4 had real emotions. If discovered, they would be destroyed. Mia, Fred, and the others were loaded onto a car, speeding away. Leo and Max, who had chased after them, could only stand helplessly, watching as they disappeared. A few days later, Max detected Fred's activation and found the location. To his surprise, they hadn't been exposed but had encountered robot traffickers. Fred had been sold to a farm to do hard labor, but when his phone was found, how could a robot have a phone? This raised suspicions, and he was apprehended. At the same time, Max received a danger signal from Leo, and they quickly fled. Their only option was to find Mia. Since they knew it was the traffickers, they began to inquire about the biggest middleman in town. When they reached Silas, they realized they were too late. Mia had already been sold. Greedy Silas had his eyes on Max as well and wanted to keep him for himself. Leo fought to protect Max, but being weaker, he quickly lost. When Fred saw Leo was about to die, it jumped in to help. Silas was shocked. When did robots learn to fight and hurt so much? Max and Leo escaped, with Max even helping Leo recharge. After a few days, Max managed to find a segment of code belonging to Mia. He immediately called Leo, and they discovered that Mia's new family had a hacker. The hacker had stolen part of Mia's code but couldn't understand it, so he posted it online for help. Leo contacted Maddie via email and arranged to meet her. However, Maddie, ever cautious, didn't trust the two of them and, claiming to need the bathroom, secretly ran away. With no other choice, Leo tried to decipher the code himself but couldn't make sense of it. Then he thought of someone who might help his father's former colleague. The colleague quickly recognized the code as David's work. David, the creator of the robotic age, had passed away too soon. The colleague easily extracted an executable file from the code, likely related to robot consciousness. Leo was curious to know how it worked, but when Leo grabbed the computer and tried to leave, the man stopped them. He blocked their way and asked, "Who are you? Where did you get this code? If you don't tell me, I'll call the police." Reluctantly, Leo revealed that he was David's son. He was just as curious about what his father had left inside Mia, and couldn't wait to plug it into his charging port. This was the secret to robots having emotions once activated. It could continuously replicate robots with feelings. The man puts his arm around his wife, who is washing the dishes, from behind and says, "The kids have gone out. Let's enjoy some long-lost time together." Unexpectedly, his wife Laura turns coldly and says she is going out too. Joe asks calmly, pretending to be calm, where she is going and who is going with her. Laura says it is a temporary job. After Laura leaves, Joe starts to think wildly, because yesterday he overheard his wife talking to the robot butler and learned that there was a man named Tom in his wife's life. They had been married for more than 10 years, but she had never mentioned him. The more Joe thought about it, the more annoyed he became, and he started drinking. He accidentally found the password card that enabled Anita's adult mode. At first, he was just curious, so he scratched off the password inside. Gradually, he was driven by a certain emotion, and accidentally took the crucial step. Joe quickly snapped out of his drunken stupor and hastily deactivated the adult mode on Anita, instructing her to erase the record. However, when Laura returned, she immediately declared that she would take Anita in for a full checkup, which startled Joe. It turned out that Laura had indeed gone to work earlier. A woman had asked for her help with a lawsuit involving her robot, which had been rejected by a theater for not understanding anything. The woman insisted her robot understood everything, but Laura felt the woman was obsessed. At the same time, the woman acted like a mirror, making Laura see herself. Didn't she also believe Anita understood everything? This realization made Laura turn to Joe and tell him she wanted to take Anita to find out who was truly in the wrong, herself or Anita. Joe was uneasy. He feared the truth about the adult mode activation would be exposed. The next day, they went to the relevant institution to get Anita checked. Laura wanted to know everything about what had happened to Anita. Joe's heart raced as he feared his secret would come to light. Soon, they learned something surprising. Anita was a 14-year-old robot. Having been used for 14 years, she was now outdated. With a high rate of malfunction, they debated whether to send Anita back to the manufacturer. And Joe, feeling guilty, was all too willing to let her go. However, Laura didn't want to let Anita go just yet, but Joe insisted. Eventually, Joe won. The technician arrived to collect Anita, but just as they were about to leave, Maddie grabbed Anita and ran off. Upon learning that Anita was 14 years old, Maddie started to believe Leo's claim that Anita was Mia, his family. She couldn't bear the thought of letting Anita be destroyed by the manufacturer. Doing so would be equivalent to killing Leo's family. After all, Anita had once been her family too. Maddie's actions led to a shocking discovery. The family's robot butler had activated adult mode. She immediately confronted her mother, who was stunned. The only men in the house were Joe and Toby, so Maddie naturally suspected her younger brother, Toby. Toby, facing the accusation, took a deep breath and seemed to make a difficult decision. He confessed that it was he who had activated the adult mode. Maddie, shocked and enraged, berated Toby with the harshest words she could muster. But Toby wasn't the problem. He was doing what he thought was best for the family. He was trying to protect Anita and, more importantly, trying to keep the fractured marriage between his parents intact. Toby, in a way, was acting more like a man than his father. Joe, realizing this, felt a deep sense of shame. How could he let his son carry such a heavy burden? Joe approached Laura and confessed his actions, asking for her forgiveness. He admitted that he had been drunk at the time but was now regretful. However, he still believed Anita wasn't a real person. Laura's anger flared. She reminded Joe that Anita had saved Toby's life and that everyone in the family considered her one of them. How could Joe dismiss her like that? Joe couldn't understand this. He even began to blame Laura for not seeing things his way. As a result, Laura kicked Joe out of the house. The atmosphere was heavy and tense, with the only person unaware of the family turmoil being the youngest daughter, Sophie, who eagerly awaited her father's return to watch her school performance. Maddie, unable to stay silent any longer, demanded to know who Tom was. She believed the rift between her parents was Laura's fault. After a fierce argument, Maddie ran away from home. Days passed before Anita finally provided Laura with Maddie's boyfriend's address, which led to Maddie's return. Laura decided to tell Maddie everything. She showed her a photo of a young girl with a boy, revealing that Tom had been Laura's brother. When Laura was 11, she had failed to keep an eye on Tom, and he tragically died in a car accident. Laura's mother had blamed Laura for Tom's death, and the guilt had haunted Laura ever since. Years later, her mother had accused her of intentionally causing Tom's death, and unable to bear the accusations, Laura left her mother. When she met Joe, she had lied and claimed to be an orphan, wanting to bury her past. This, of course, had led to the misunderstanding between them. After hearing the truth, Maddie forgave her mother, but what neither of them realized was that Anita had been quietly listening to everything. She seemed lost in thought. Suddenly, Anita screamed, "I am Mia!" The car stopped abruptly, and Anita urgently said, "Anita's virus detection system has identified me as a virus. It is trying to destroy me." Laura panicked and grabbed her phone to call the authorities, but Mia begged her not to do so. If she did, Mia would be destroyed. Mia then said, "I am also a mother. My child is waiting for me to return." She turned to Maddie and told her that the only way to wake her up was not from the brain but from the body. Just then, Anita activated again. Maddie quickly contacted Mia's family, revealing that Mia was indeed inside Anita. However, Mia had claimed to have a child, which didn't add up. Leo, upon hearing this, insisted that it was true. He had Max bring over a monitor and, with a quick motion, Leo unbuttoned his shirt. To Maddie's surprise, there were 2 wires connected to his abdomen. When the wires were plugged into the monitor, images of Leo's childhood memories appeared on the screen. Leo's mother had suffered from mental illness, and as a scientist, his father had created a robot to care for Leo. That robot was Mia, and she had a deep, motherly love for Leo. Fearing that Leo would be lonely, Leo's father later created 3 more robots: Max, Fred, and others. They were like siblings to Leo. One day, Leo's mother had an episode and tried to take Leo away. They got in a car, but it crashed. In a last-ditch effort, Mia saved Leo, but he was brain-dead from asphyxiation. Leo's father, David, worked tirelessly to restore Leo, turning him into a half-human, half-machine being. After that, Leo grew up. But one day, David suddenly went mad, destroying all his experiments and throwing them out. From then on, Leo and his siblings lived a life of constant fear and uncertainty. Maddie now understood. Mia had been Leo's adoptive mother, not his girlfriend. Her sudden awakening was due to hearing the story of the child's car accident. She had taken Sophie in the night because the sight of water on the window had reminded her of Leo trapped in water, triggering her protective instincts. Although she had been transformed into another person by the reinstalled system, the maternal love in her heart could never be erased. Maddie immediately took Leo back home to find Anita, and after explaining the situation, Laura kicked Joe out of the house. Joe, seeing 2 unfamiliar men entering his home, worried about his family's safety and quietly took out his phone. Inside the house, Leo connected with Anita, and after several attempts, Mia woke up. However, not far away, a man was leading a group of armed personnel toward the house. The man satisfied his own desires by having her abused every day, and afterward, the landlady would use a high-pressure water gun to make her and the others line up, washing them clean for use the next day. This behavior was legal in the future because they weren't considered human, they were robots. But what no one knew was that Niska was different from other robots. She was capable of feeling joy and pain. Here, she felt immense humiliation. However, she dared not escape. Escaping meant exposing her ability to think for herself, and the consequence of that would be destruction. She could have shut down her sensory system, but Niska believed she existed precisely because of that sensory system, so she firmly refused to turn it off. Therefore, all the pain she felt turned into overwhelming hatred. One day, she finally couldn't bear it anymore. This seemingly gentlemanly man made all sorts of bizarre requests, and Niska snapped his neck, causing him to fall to the ground instantly. Then, she walked out of the room and, in front of the landlady, dug out the tracking chip from the back of her neck, which made the landlady faint with shock. Niska went to the mall, grabbed a shopping bag, and entered the restroom. After putting on colored contact lenses and changing into a new outfit, she immediately looked indistinguishable from an ordinary human. A man soon approached her. Unexpectedly, Niska initiated the conversation, suggesting they go to the man's house. Just as the man excitedly stumbled over his words, Niska saw a woman's hairband in the restroom. Sure enough, the man was a scumbag. Claiming to be single, Niska decisively grabbed a kitchen knife and went to confront the man. He was tidying up the room and awkwardly explained that his daughter had visited for the weekend, so the house was a little messy. When he looked up, Niska had disappeared, leaving only the kitchen knife on the chair. His words had saved his life. Just as Niska began to have a more favorable view of humans, a poster completely changed her perspective. It was for an underground venue where, for just $20, you could literally beat a robot to death, all to help people vent their frustration. It turned out these were humans who opposed and hated robots. Robots had taken their jobs and disrupted the world order, but they were powerless to do anything about it, because technology was controlled by the elite, who used it as a tool to profit. So, these people could only vent their anger on old robots. Niska also spent money to buy a robot, but when she grabbed a baseball bat, she turned on the humans instead. One by one, using the robot's agility and strength, she began to slaughter them. As the footage spread online, Niska caused a panic among humans. Robots were starting to harm humans. Even more importantly, humans had no way to fight back. But this was just the beginning of humanity's nightmare. Later, Leo's brother found Niska and told her that their father had left a special code inside them. He could create more robots like them, but only if they all gathered together. By this time, Mia had been found and restored to consciousness, and Fred, who had been captured by the research institute, managed to escape and called Leo. This man was jealous of his robot butler because he discovered his wife loved the robot more than him. His wife was paralyzed and at home, relying on the robot to take care of her life and rehabilitation. The man, Pete, was a police officer. He was so busy with work that he had no time and had to buy a robot to take care of his wife. But over time, although his wife didn't say anything, he could feel it. Since the robot came into the picture, his wife's gaze toward him had changed. What Pete didn't know was that in front of the robot, his wife had become like a young girl. Pete also wanted to take better care of his wife. Once he was home from work, he would let the robot rest and begin taking care of things himself. However, he soon realized he couldn't even lift his wife, and had to rely on the robot in the end. He became frustrated. Not only did the robot take care of his wife, but it also prepared breakfast for Pete, which only added to his irritation. Finally, the day came when his wife decided to stay with the robot and separate from Pete. However, after activating adult mode, the robot entered a loop and eventually needed Pete's help. After a huge argument, he was kicked out by his wife. Beatrice, his daily work partner, suggested he stay at her place and sleep on the sofa. Although it was unexpected, Pete agreed. To his surprise, he actually slept on the sofa. Meanwhile, in the room, Beatrice pulled out a balloon-like object from her body. It contained recently eaten food. Then, she lifted her shirt, revealing that she was also a robot. A police officer who investigates robots every day turned out to be a robot himself. What was even more shocking was that Pete had never noticed. Beatrice, however, was confused. Why did she have to disguise herself like this and live as if she were human? What was the point of it all? It wasn't until she saw the news about Niska on TV that everything clicked for her. After a night with Pete, she told him she was a robot. Pete was stunned. He hated robots. But there was something about Beatrice that confused him. He sort of liked her. And Beatrice found herself liking Pete, too. After Fred was captured, he was hooked up to various machines, and his clothes were removed. Images from his mind immediately appeared on the screen. The researchers were curious as to why he brought a phone to work. After all, he was a robot. What use did he have for a phone? Until this question was answered, America and humanity itself might cease to exist. But Fred refused to speak. With no other options, they decided to modify Fred's brain program, then dressed him and restored his freedom. But Fred started to think about something. He went to the door, picked up the stun gun from the ground, and aimed it at the mastermind. The man quickly begged for mercy, and Fred shot him, avoiding the vital parts, knocking him down. Then, Fred quickly ran outside. After taking care of the remaining armed personnel, he stole a car and successfully escaped. Fred immediately contacted his companions, but this was exactly part of the police trap. Sure enough, after Leo received Fred's call, he and Max immediately set out to pick up Fred, but they hadn't gone far when they were stopped by the police. Max noticed police officers leading people toward them. He told Leo, and Leo immediately drove off to escape. But soon, they were blocked again. Left with no choice, the two of them had to abandon the car and flee on foot. They reached a bridge, and Leo ran up the bridge, but Max stopped and didn't follow. He told Leo, "I only have 4% battery left. You go on without me." Leo replied, then switched to low battery mode. Saying this, Leo grabbed Max and continued running toward the other side of the river, but halfway across, Max stopped again and climbed onto the railing. The police, seeing this, didn't dare to approach or open fire. Leo anxiously and confusedly looked at Max. Max said, "They want to catch me to research me." "You go! I can't escape anyway." When Leo heard this, he shouted in panic, "If you shut down in the water, you'll sink to the bottom and die. Do you know that?" But Fred, the robot's brother, remained calm. He calculated, using the flow of water and time information, to figure out how far Max had drifted. Sure enough, they found Max on a riverbank. The two of them quickly carried him back to Joe's house, where they discovered a wound on Max's body. A large amount of blue liquid had leaked out, equivalent to blood in humans. At the same time, Max's battery was running out, and his system was crashing. Without delay, the remaining 3 robots gave Max a large bowl of liquid and began charging him, waiting for him to reboot. To help Max wake up faster, Fred, Joe, and Toby went to the lawn to play soccer. Playing soccer didn't help Max but was just to make time pass faster. At that moment, the police arrived. Everyone became nervous. After a forced calm, Joe opened the door, only to find out that the police were just doing a follow-up visit, asking Joe if he was satisfied with how the emergency call had been handled. This made everyone tense, and after the police left, Leo angrily approached Joe and demanded to know why he called the police. He had thought the police were brought by Joe. Joe explained, "When you came to my house, I didn't know you. I was worried about my family's safety, so I called the police." Leo was still upset. He decided that once Max was fully charged, he would take everyone and leave. Laura quickly made some good dishes to thank everyone and apologize for her unreliable husband. After finishing, she remembered they were basically all robots and couldn't eat. They could only chat. Mia said, "We don't reproduce, so we don't need food like humans." Niska immediately replied, "Who says we can't? We have a hidden wisdom code that can help robots gain intelligence. This is almost like giving life," Lisa said. Mia immediately turned to Leo for confirmation. Laura and her husband, overhearing this, became worried, for robots with unlimited intelligence were a completely different concept. This could potentially threaten all of humanity. At this moment, Max powered on, but when he opened his mouth, he couldn't speak clearly and was twitching uncontrollably. Leo saw this and felt a sense of dread. He immediately began fixing Max's system, but failed. He then considered having everyone connect to awaken Max using the wisdom code. But at that moment, the sound of the TV blared unexpectedly. It was the video of Niska massacring the civilians. Laura turned around and saw her young daughter in Niska's arms. She hurriedly called Sophie over. Then she looked at Niska and the others like they were terrorists because the scene was too shocking. Despite Niska repeatedly explaining that she had acted out of the inhumane treatment she had suffered and had now reformed, Joe stubbornly insisted they leave. Niska still wanted to explain, but Leo immediately went to pack, taking a backpack and a piece of clothing. However, when he turned around, he heard someone calling him from behind. Leo seemed afraid of him but also fascinated. The others saw him and seemed on edge. At that moment, a large group of armed personnel broke down the door, and all the robots were captured in one fell swoop. Pete searched through Beatrice's house and discovered that the kitchen was spotless, proving she never cooked. This confirmed that Beatrice was definitely a robot. But this left Pete with even more questions. How could a robot be capable of falling in love? So, he began investigating Beatrice's background, until he saw a photo, and he froze. Beatrice looked exactly like a woman who had died many years ago. Standing next to her was her husband, David, the father of robots, the man who had brought humanity into the robot age. Pete finally started to get some answers about Beatrice's origins, but what he couldn't understand was why Beatrice, a robot, had worked with him for so long, investigating other robots. It was all very strange. It turned out Beatrice knew there were 4 other robots like her that could think independently. She wanted to find them, but not to join them. She aimed to destroy them. However, Beatrice's actions ultimately proved David's great success. Later, Beatrice appeared in front of the director. He looked at the woman in front of him, incredulous. "Isn't this David's wife? How is she still so young?" Beatrice told the director a secret that could change the world. She said, "David didn't just create 4 robots with human-level intelligence. He also implanted a robotic brain into his son. More importantly, hidden in them is a code. As long as the 5 of them come together, they can replicate more intelligent robots." Beatrice said, "I know you already control one of them. You'd better control them all right now." So, the director sent armed personnel to capture Leo and the 4 robots, tying them together in a circle. Leo knew the director had left an interface and intended to steal the code. but he still chose to merge the code, because they wanted to save Max, who had lost his intelligence due to injury. But as it began, he realized part of the code was still missing. It turned out Beatrice was key to the missing part. She also carried the code, but the director had no idea. He successfully entered the next phase, dissecting the robots for chip research, including Leo. Since he had just consulted a lawyer, Leo was no longer considered human and wasn't protected by law. The staff connected to Leo's brain, and a segment of his most cherished memories, which had been accessed countless times, appeared. These were probably his most treasured recollections. Beatrice approached the screen and saw the face that looked just like hers. Beatrice was moved. On the other side, as the staff raised the knife to slice Mia's spine, they were interrupted by a phone call. The director on the other end of the line ordered them to stop what they were doing and release them. It turned out that Maddie had found the cached memory files of Leo's playback on the computer. Laura used this to threaten the director, stating that if the video was made public, the public would pity Leo for what he had gone through. If the director harmed them, it would provoke public condemnation, and the company's stock would suffer. The director didn't want to take the blame, since he had already gotten what he wanted. Leo and the others managed to escape. They arrived at a secret location and reunited with Laura's family. The robots were thankful to Laura for risking her life to save them, especially Mia, who had been much loved by Laura's family when she was Anita. But soon, they realized they were being tracked and immediately moved. Leo was curious about how their location had been leaked. Toby pointed at Fred and said, "It's him. He always drops out and zones out. He had done this in the park just now, and even when they were playing soccer at my house the other day, he suddenly stopped and stood still for a long time." Leo went over to ask Fred what was going on, but Fred suddenly attacked Leo. They had no choice but to shut Fred down. That's when they discovered Fred had been acting as the director's spy all along. Leo angrily called the director. Leo's actions were very risky, but he had no other choice. Not long after, Beatrice arrived alone as planned. Leo had set a trap, and they began merging the code. However, Matty, who was monitoring the progress, noticed that the code was decreasing as if it were infected by a virus. It turned out that Beatrice was using her own consciousness to consume the others. Inside the code space, Leo rolled his eyes, and Mia quickly begged Beatrice to stop. But Beatrice was the most successful generation of robots. She was so human-like that she could think like a human and knew how these robots could pose a threat to humans. What she was doing was something humans would do. But when Mia said, "You're Leo's most important person," and called her sister, Beatrice softened and changed her mind. This was also something humans would do. The wisdom code on the computer screen started to recover and grow again. Soon, everyone opened their eyes, and Max had regained his intelligence. This meant that the complete backup of the wisdom code saved in the computer was incredibly powerful. Once it was uploaded to the network, all the robot servants would awaken, but Beatrice no longer cared about that. She had reached the highest level of humanity. Without saying a word, she left. Instead, Niska deleted the code from the computer with a single click, just as everyone gasped in surprise. She handed a portable hard drive to Laura and said it was better to give the code to someone trustworthy. Unlike Beatrice, Niska said she was reluctant to leave the human world and didn't want to live in seclusion with Leo. She bid farewell to her companions, and the other 4 robots prepared to leave as well. Mia hugged Laura. Laura, Matty, and Sophie were saddened by her departure. The saddest of all was Beatrice, who didn't even know what she was grieving for. She walked alone on the street, looking so lonely. At that moment, someone caught up with her. It was Pete. He had finally found Beatrice and confessed his feelings to her. In an instant, Beatrice smiled. At Laura's house, since Anita was gone, life went on as usual, but the youngest daughter had developed a new habit doing housework non-stop, just like Anita used to. One day, Maddie suddenly screamed. The portable hard drive was missing. Then the scene switched. Niska was holding the hard drive, sitting on a train. The world was about to change. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.